Imagine a silence so loud it rings in your ears. A silence that stretches across a desert called the Journey of the Dead Man. It is July 16th, 1945. In a few seconds, the world you know will cease to exist. A new age is about to be born, not of water or earth, but of fire. When the light finally came, it wasn't the light of the sun. It was the light of 1,000 suns, blinding even those who had their eyes tightly shut. In that terrifying beauty, a thin, brilliant man felt the world shift on its axis. As the mushroom cloud rose into the heavens, a line from an ancient Hindu scripture echoed in his mind. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He was a man of poetry and physics, a man of immense charm and deep, dark depression. He gave humanity the power to touch the stars, but also the means to turn the planet into a cinder. This is the story of the modern Prometheus, the man who stole the fire of the gods and spent the rest of his life being consumed by it. This is J. Robert Oppenheimer. Part 1. The Poisoned Apple. Long before he was the father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer was a young man on the edge of a total psychological collapse. Imagine a mind so fast it outruns its own sanity. At 21, Robert was a student at Cambridge University, struggling in the laboratories. He was a theoretical genius, but his hands were clumsy. He felt out of place, isolated, and mocked by the rigid academic world. One evening, consumed by a sudden dark impulse of rage and despair, young Robert did the unthinkable. He took an apple and injected it with toxic chemicals, cyanide. He left it on the desk of his tutor, Patrick Blackett. It was a moment of pure, distorted madness. He didn't want to be a killer. He wanted the world to stop pressing against him. Fortunately, the apple was never eaten, but the poisoned apple incident remained a permanent scar on his soul. It was the first sign that Robert's brilliance was inseparable from a certain kind of darkness. To save himself, he fled to Europe, the epicenter of the quantum revolution. It was the 1920s, the golden age of physics. In the classrooms of Germany, Robert finally found his tribe. He didn't just study quantum mechanics, he lived it. He learned Sanskrit to read the Vedas in their original form. He read Proust. He smoked constantly. He was a polymath who could talk about the nature of the soul as easily as the movement of an electron. By the time he returned to America, he was no longer the broken boy from Cambridge. He was a charismatic leader, a scientist poet who would soon be asked to do the impossible. He brought quantum physics to the United States, turning Berkeley into a temple of science. But as the 1930s drew to a close, a darker shadow began to loom over the world. In laboratories in Berlin, the atom had been split, the fire had been discovered, and now the world was looking for someone brave enough, and perhaps broken enough, to harness it. A war was coming, a war that would be won not by soldiers, but by a secret. Robert Oppenheimer was about to be invited to a place that didn't exist on any map, a place where he would build a city, and then a nightmare. Part 2. The Laboratory of the Stars. In 1942, the world was a house on fire. The Nazis were making terrifying progress in physics, and the United States knew that if Hitler got the big one first, the history of humanity would end in a dark, permanent winter. To stop this, the US government launched the Manhattan Project. They needed a general to build the machine and a scientist to build the soul. General Leslie Groves, a man of iron and concrete who had just finished building the Pentagon, was chosen to lead. But for the scientific director, he made a choice that shocked everyone. Groves looked at Robert Oppenheimer, a man who had never won a Nobel Prize, a man with left-wing political ties, and a man who couldn't even manage a small university department. And he saw something no one else did. He saw a man driven by a desperate, hidden ambition. Groves said, "He's a genius, a real genius. He knows everything." Oppenheimer, the poet of physics, was about to become a general of the mind. Robert knew exactly where to go. He chose a place he loved, a remote mesa in New Mexico called Los Alamos. He once said his two great loves were physics and New Mexico. Now he was about to marry them in a ceremony of fire. Imagine a city that doesn't exist on any map. A city where the average age was 25 and the average IQ was off the charts. Scientists were brought there in total secrecy. Their mail was censored. Their names were changed, and their lives were guarded by men with machine guns. Oppenheimer was the heartbeat of this secret world. He traded his academic robes for a military uniform and his wide-brimmed fedora. He was everywhere at once. He understood the chemistry, the metallurgy, the explosives, and the physics. But more importantly, he understood the people. He became a master of compartmentalization. He had to keep the world's most dangerous secret while managing the world's biggest egos. He calmed the brilliant but temperamental Edward Teller. He debated with the legendary Enrico Fermi, and he listened to the whispers of Niels Bohr. But as the city grew, the man shrank. Robert was down to 115 pounds, about 52 kilograms. He lived on black coffee, gin, and Chesterfields. He was a man being consumed by his own project. He wasn't just building a bomb. He was building a weight that would eventually crush him. In the halls of Los Alamos, a haunting question began to circulate. We are building this to stop the Nazis, but what if the Nazis are already beaten? By 1945, Germany was collapsing. The original reason for the bomb was disappearing. Some scientists wanted to stop, but Oppenheimer pushed them forward. He argued that the world needed to see what this weapon could do. He believed that if this secret stayed in a box, a future war would surely destroy civilization. To save the world from a nuclear future, he believed he had to demonstrate a nuclear present. It was a terrifying gamble. He was justifying the creation of a destroyer in the name of peace. This was the chain reaction of his own conscience. He convinced his colleagues that they weren't just building a weapon, they were ending all wars. July 1945. The gadget was ready. It was a sphere of plutonium, a masterpiece of human ingenuity and a monument to human cruelty. The test was named Trinity, a name Oppenheimer took from a poem by John Donne. Batter my heart, three-personed God. On the night before the test, a massive desert storm broke out. Lightning struck the ground around the tower, as if nature itself was trying to stop what was about to happen. Oppenheimer sat in a small bunker, reading poetry and chain-smoking, waiting for the 0 hour. He knew that if this worked, he would be a hero. He also knew that if it worked, he would never sleep peacefully again. He was about to pull the trigger on the most significant event in human history since the discovery of fire. The countdown began. The silence of the desert was about to be broken by a sound that would echo through the centuries. The flash came first, then the heat, and finally the realization. The world had changed, and Robert Oppenheimer had become its most famous and most haunted citizen. Part 3. Chain Reaction and the Shadow. August 6th, 1945. At Los Alamos, the news came over the radio. A single bomb had been dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. A city had been erased in the blink of an eye. At first, there was a cheer. The scientists, the men and women who had worked for years in the desert, felt the rush of a success that ended a war. They had done it. They had won. But Robert Oppenheimer did not join the cheering. He sat in his office, his eyes fixed on a distant point that no one else could see. He later said that his first thought was of the victims. He thought of the screams that were silenced by a light he had helped create. A few days later, Nagasaki followed. The war was over, but a new kind of terror had begun. Oppenheimer was now the most famous scientist in the world. His face was on the cover of Time magazine. He was the modern Prometheus. But inside, the chain reaction of his own conscience was accelerating. He began to see the bomb not as a tool of peace, but as a ghost that would follow him forever. He walked into the Oval Office to meet President Harry Truman. Robert, looking at his thin, trembling hands, said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, a man of cold political reality, had no patience for the scientist's soul-searching. After Oppenheimer left, Truman turned to his aides and said, "Don't let that crybaby in here again." The man who built the fire was no longer needed by the men who wanted to use it. The 1950s arrived, and with them came a new kind of winter, the Cold War. The world was split in two, and fear was the new currency. Oppenheimer, now a powerful advisor to the government, began to argue against the creation of an even bigger weapon, the hydrogen bomb. He called it a weapon of genocide. But in the world of power, dissent is seen as treason. Robert had enemies, men like Louis Strauss, who felt slighted by Oppenheimer's sharp tongue and superior intellect. They decided to destroy the man who had given them the atom. They didn't use a bomb to destroy him. They used a hearing. In 1954, in a small, sweltering room, Robert Oppenheimer was put on trial. Not for a crime, but for his past, his associations, and his very thoughts. They dragged his private life into the mud. They questioned his loyalty to the country he had helped save. For weeks, Robert sat in that room, being picked apart by lawyers. He didn't fight back with his usual brilliance. He seemed to accept the punishment. It was as if he felt he deserved to be broken. He was paying the price for the fire he had stolen. They stripped him of his security clearance. They took away his power and his voice. The father of the atomic bomb was now an exile in his own country. He spent his final years in Princeton, a ghost haunting the halls of academia. He had become a symbol of the 20th century, a man who reached for the stars and found only ashes. He had realized that once you start a chain reaction, you cannot stop it. The fire he unleashed was now in the hands of others, and there was nothing he could do but watch the world tremble under its shadow. Robert Oppenheimer died in 1967, taken by the same thing that fueled his life, smoke and fire. But his legacy didn't end with his breath. It lives in every silent missile silo, every nuclear reactor, and every sunset that reminds us of the light of 1,000 suns. He once said that the physicists had known sin, and this was a knowledge which they could not lose. J. Robert Oppenheimer was a god among men because he dared to hold the power of the gods, but he was a tragic icon because he had to live with the consequences. Was he a hero who ended a war, or a villain who endangered our future? Perhaps he was both, a man caught in the collision between what we can do and what we should do. Thank you for joining us in the desert. This was Iconic Figures. If you felt the weight of the atom, hit the like button and subscribe for our next legend. Tell us in the comments, if you were Oppenheimer, would you have finished the bomb, or would you have let the apple stay poisoned? We'll see you in the next episode.